She said it loud enough for the whole front row to hear. "Don't take communion. You're not family." My daughter didn't even look at me when she said it. She just squeezed little Anna's hand tighter and stepped up to the altar like I wasn't standing there. Like I hadn't ironed that white dress the night before. Like I hadn't bought the damn thing in the first place. The church was quiet, waiting. The organ hummed softly in the background. Father Joshua stood there, arms open, offering the body of Christ like he'd done every Sunday for decades. I was next in line, right behind them. But now it felt like a cliff's edge. Anna glanced over her shoulder. She looked confused, like she didn't understand why Grandma couldn't come. Her tiny gloved fingers trembled in her mother's hand, and I hated that she saw it. This moment of cruelty, dressed up like righteousness. I should have walked away. Maybe that's what my daughter hoped I'd do. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped forward. Not toward the chalice, not toward the bread. I reached for Father Joshua's hand, the hand that had baptized my husband, the hand that buried him, the hand that blessed this very girl when she was born in the same church. He looked at me, just a second. His brow tightened. Then he squeezed my fingers. Firm, warm, steady. No words, just a small nod. And in that moment, I didn't feel ashamed. I felt seen. I turned and walked back to my pew, the stone of my heels clicking on the tiles like punctuation. My hands didn't shake. Not yet. The rest of the service passed in a blur. Hymns. A sermon I couldn't follow. More standing, more sitting. I kept my eyes on the stained glass above the pulpit, the one with the shepherd and the lambs. It used to make me cry. Today it didn't. After the final prayer, people filed out. Some stopped to greet one another, shake hands, exchange tired pleasantries. I caught a few glances, curious, uncomfortable. No one said anything to me. My daughter gathered Anna's things quickly. "Come on," she said, not even whispering. "We're going to brunch." Anna looked at me again, unsure. But the tug on her arm was enough. She went. I stayed sitting long after the sanctuary emptied. The last time I sat in that pew with family, it was for my husband's memorial. That was 9 years ago. Anna was just 5 then. She clung to me the whole service, whispering questions about heaven. My daughter had cried, but only after people were looking. Her grief was always curated, always measured. I didn't say anything then. I just held my granddaughter and let her fall asleep against my side. Now she's old enough to pull away. I took my time walking out. Father Joshua was speaking to someone near the back. When he saw me, he excused himself and came over. "You all right?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "You saw." I did. I didn't offer an explanation. Neither did he. There wasn't anything left to say. "You coming next week?" he asked, as if it were an ordinary Sunday. "I think so." He smiled gently. "You should." I walked out into the late morning sun. It was one of those crisp spring days. Not warm yet, but full of light. The kind of day that almost convinces you to forgive people who don't deserve it. My car was parked under the old maple. I unlocked the door, slid into the seat, and just sat there. I could still hear her voice. Not family. The words echoed, hollow and hard. We used to be so close, my daughter and I. After my husband died, I moved into the guest house behind hers. I helped raise Anna. I made soup when they were sick. I babysat on work nights, paid for the piano lessons, bought every school uniform she ever wore. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being needed. Then I stopped being wanted. When the mortgage payments got hard, I covered them. When my daughter wanted to go back to grad school, I co-signed the loan. When her husband left, I stayed quiet. I didn't ask questions. I just held the silence with her. And now I was told I wasn't family. I started the engine. The old Buick rattled slightly, then smoothed out. I drove slowly, not because I was afraid of the road, but because I wasn't ready to be home yet. Home meant stillness, and I didn't want to sit in that chair by the window and think too long about the things I couldn't fix. Still, I went. I pulled into my driveway. The hydrangeas I planted 2 years ago were starting to bloom, soft and blue, like Anna's eyes. I sat there for a minute, watching them nod in the breeze. Then I turned off the engine and walked inside. The house was quiet, except for the tick of the clock and the faint creak of the wood under my feet. I poured myself tea, sat at the table, and wrote one name down on a piece of paper. Not my daughter's. Not today. The name I wrote was Anna's, just her first name, in my handwriting, small and careful. I didn't know what I was going to do with that slip of paper yet, but writing it down felt like placing a pin on a map, a place I could start from, somewhere still worth going. I folded it once, then again, and tucked it under the sugar jar. No one would find it there but me. The house felt colder than usual. I walked through the rooms slowly, as if seeing them for the first time. The crocheted blanket I'd made during the pandemic still lay folded on the armrest. The same ceramic cat Anna gave me when she was 7 still sat by the window, chipped at the ear but watching faithfully. The books on the shelf hadn't moved in years. I had. I sat in my usual chair, not the soft one by the TV, but the firmer one near the window, where the light came through just right in the mornings. From here, I could see their backyard. I used to watch Anna play there. Now the curtains were always drawn. Privacy, my daughter had said. Boundaries. I hadn't stepped foot in that house for almost 4 months. The last time I'd been inside was Christmas Eve. I remember because I brought a pan of sweet rolls, like always. My daughter barely looked up from her phone. "Oh," she said. "You didn't have to." And I hadn't been asked to since. It wasn't sudden. That's the thing people don't tell you. Love doesn't always leave in a storm. Sometimes it's just a chair pulled away slowly. A phone call unanswered. A glance that goes through you instead of to you. I don't know when my daughter decided I was a relic. Something to be tolerated, not treasured. Maybe after her divorce. Maybe after she started making more money than me. Maybe after I said no the first time, when she asked if I could sell this house to help her buy a bigger one. I remember the way she smiled, tense, thin. She never asked again, but things shifted after that. They always do when money's involved. A sharp knock on the door pulled me out of my thoughts. I stood carefully, bones stiff from sitting too long, and opened it. It was Matthew, my grandson, the older one. 16, sullen, always hungry. He hadn't been by in months. "Hey," he said, eyes flicking down to his phone, then up again. "Mom said you might have the charger I left here?" Charger, of course. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. He walked in like it was a store he didn't want to browse, head low, feet dragging. I went to the drawer by the stairs and found the charger. The cord was frayed. "Here." He took it without thanks, started to turn. "You were at church this morning," I said quietly. "Yeah." He shifted his weight. "I saw you." "I saw you too," he said, then hesitated. "That thing, what Mom said, that was kind of messed up." I looked at him for a long moment. He looked like his father, the one who left. Same eyebrows, same nervous hands. But he was still here, at least. "Why do you think she said it?" I asked. He shrugged. "She's been like that lately. I don't know. Uptight." Uptight. A 16-year-old's mercy. He pocketed the charger and glanced toward the door. "I should go." I nodded. "Tell your sister I liked her dress." He paused. "She was sad you didn't come up." I said nothing. "She doesn't get it," he added. "Neither do I, really." "Neither do I," I repeated softly. After he left, I sat back down in the chair and stared out the window again. A bird landed on the fence, pecked at something, flew off. I wasn't angry, not in the way people expect. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't even planning a confrontation. I was just tired. Tired of being quiet. Tired of bending. That night, I boiled a few potatoes and scrambled eggs for dinner. Simple food. Comfort food. The kind you make when you don't feel like feeding anyone's expectations but your own. After the dishes were done, I sat down with my checkbook. I opened the drawer where I kept my records, receipts, notes, copies of the payments I'd made over the years, school fees, rent when she'd been between jobs, medical bills, ballet classes, daycare, groceries, camp. There were over 40 entries. None of them repaid. Not that I'd asked. I was a mother. That was the job. But tonight, it felt like the job was over. I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer's office. I didn't expect an answer. It was Sunday. But I left a message. "Hi, this is Margaret Ellis. I'd like to set up a meeting to discuss my will and property. No rush, but sometime this week if possible. Thank you." I hung up. Then I went to bed. I didn't cry. That surprised me. But sometimes, dignity is quieter than sorrow. The next morning, I woke up early. The sun was still low, casting long shadows across the bedroom floor. I stood at the mirror, looked at my face. My husband used to say I had the kind of face that made people confess things. "You see too much," he once told me. "That's your gift and your curse." Maybe he was right. Downstairs, I made coffee, toasted bread, wrote another name on a fresh piece of paper. Not my daughter's. Anna's again. Only this time I added a last name. Her last name used to be mine. Anna Margaret Ellis, it had said on her birth certificate. I remember holding the paper at the hospital, hands still shaking from the emotion of watching her come into the world. My daughter had been too tired to fill out the forms, so they gave them to me. "Just put what she tells you," the nurse said. But she hadn't told me anything, so I filled it out as best I could, and she never bothered to correct it. Now, it was Anna Lewis. They changed it 2 years ago. Quietly. I only found out when a Christmas card came addressed that way. "Oh, it's just easier for school," my daughter had said, like names were clutter to be swept into drawers. I looked at the paper in my hand. Anna Margaret Ellis. My name, not as possession, but as continuity. Not as leverage, but as anchor. My lawyer called back that morning. "Mrs. Ellis," his assistant said, her voice always chipper. "We can fit you in tomorrow at 10. "Perfect," I said. "I'll bring my documents." I had all of them. Deed to the house, the investment statements, insurance papers, all tucked neatly in a folder I'd once used for church programs. The house was still in my name. That was the part my daughter had never quite forgiven. A few years after her divorce, she'd come to me with a plan. She wanted to refinance her own mortgage, but the banks wouldn't offer what she needed. "They want stability," she'd said. "If I could just show them your property as part of my assets, just temporarily." I said no. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just said I wasn't comfortable. She didn't speak to me for nearly a month. After that, things were different. She stopped inviting me to school events. My birthday became a text message. At Thanksgiving, she started making excuses. "We're doing a small thing this year," she'd say. "Just the four of us." But somehow, pictures always appeared later. A table full of guests, smiling into a camera I hadn't been invited to face. But the house stayed mine. A small, single-story place on a quiet street. Nothing grand, no vaulted ceilings or fancy landscaping. But it had been ours, mine and Harold's, since 1979. We'd bought it the year after Anna was born, when the economy was still uncertain and the wallpaper still avocado green. We raised her here. She had learned to ride a bike in the driveway, broken her arm falling from the maple in the backyard, written her college essay at this kitchen table, and now she wouldn't step through the door unless she needed something. I pulled out the old key from the drawer, the one she used to use before she gave it back. The tag was still attached, a little plastic heart Anna had drawn on in crayon. That's why I never threw it away. Not the plastic. The drawing. Funny how you keep things. That afternoon, I baked banana bread. I always make 2 loaves, one to freeze, one to keep. As the kitchen filled with the scent of cinnamon and ripe fruit, I thought about the church, about Father Joshua, about the way his hand closed around mine like he knew the weight of what I was carrying. He'd been here a long time, since before Harold passed. He'd married my daughter, baptized Anna. He knew the shape of this family better than most. I wondered what he'd thought, standing there at the altar, watching my daughter say those words. "You're not family." I wondered if it reminded him of anything. The bread finished. I let it cool. Then I wrapped the first loaf and walked it down the street, not to their house, but to Mrs. Pruitt, my neighbor 2 doors down. She's 91, mostly blind, and still sharp as a tack. She opened the door in her slippers. "Banana bread?" she asked, smiling before I even spoke. "Fresh?" I said. "Come in then. I've got coffee." We sat at her table, just like we'd done a dozen times before. She poured with her steady old hands and said nothing for a while. I liked that about her. "Your girl was cold to you at church," she said after a few sips. No judgment, just a fact, set on the table like sugar. I looked at her. "You saw?" "I always sit near the front," she said. "Better for my ears." I nodded. "I heard it, and I saw what you did." "I wasn't thinking," I admitted. "Sure you were," she said. "You just weren't thinking about them." I smiled, small. We didn't talk about it much more. After an hour, I walked home, lighter somehow. The next morning, I dressed in something decent, the navy slacks and cream blouse I kept for appointments, Harold's old watch on my wrist. I wanted to feel him with me. At the lawyer's office, I handed over the documents. "I'd like to set up a trust," I said. "For my granddaughter, not for my daughter, just the girl." He raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. We went over the details. I signed where he pointed. It was dry work, clinical, but every stroke of the pen felt like a stitch, mending something torn too long. By the time I left, the air had shifted. I wasn't just someone they called when the checking account ran dry. I wasn't just an obligation in a back pew. I was a woman with a name and property and decisions. I stopped by the florist on the way home, bought a small bouquet of white tulips, not for anyone else, just for the table, just for me. That afternoon, I sat again in my chair by the window. A different bird landed on the fence this time. Bright red. Cardinal. Harold's favorite. I sipped my tea and watched the wind stir the leaves. I hadn't heard from my daughter since Sunday, but that silence didn't sting the way it once did. I'd written 2 names down, and they were enough. The lawyer's office was on the 2nd floor of a low building that still smelled like old carpet and copier ink. I'd been there once before, years ago, when Harold and I updated our wills after his 2nd heart scare. He'd hated the place, said it felt like planning for death. I hadn't disagreed, but now, sitting across from Mr. Halpern again, I realized this wasn't about dying. It was about not disappearing. He adjusted his glasses and looked over the paperwork we'd started last time. I see you've decided to place the house in a trust, naming your granddaughter as sole beneficiary. Yes. No joint designation with your daughter? No. He gave a polite pause, the kind lawyers are trained to offer. Then he moved on. We'll need a witness when you sign. I can provide one from the office staff. That's fine. The pen they gave me was heavier than it looked. Not expensive, just solid. Real. As I signed, I felt something shift inside. A click, like a bolt sliding into place. It was done. Do you want the trust to be revocable or irrevocable? He asked. Irrevocable, I said without hesitation. That surprised him. He tilted his head. Just to clarify, that means you can't change it later without going through legal proceedings. It's final. I know. He studied me for a moment. I didn't flinch. When I walked out, the morning was still quiet. September air, not quite cool yet. I held the folder under my arm like it weighed more than just papers. In a way, it did. It held the rest of my life, or at least the part I was still willing to share. On the way home, I stopped at a diner, the old one near the train tracks. I hadn't eaten there in years. They still served the same burnt coffee and oversalted hash browns, and I still liked it. The waitress was new, young. She called me Han, which I didn't mind. I sat by the window and watched the freight cars roll by, loud and unbothered. When I got home, I opened the folder again, checked the documents one more time. Not because I doubted them, just because I needed to see the words in black and white. Anna Margaret Ellis, sole beneficiary. There it was. A week ago, I would have hesitated. I would have wondered how my daughter would react, whether it would start a war, whether it would make me seem petty. But after that Sunday in church, after her voice sliced through the silence like a knife, I stopped worrying about seeming anything. I wasn't being cruel. I was being clear. I didn't owe anyone the rest of me. Later that afternoon, I got a call from Anna's school. A recording, just the usual reminder about the parent-teacher night. I wasn't listed as an emergency contact anymore. I used to be. I used to be on every form, every list, every calendar. Now I was a stranger in their systems, but not in hers. I opened my desk drawer and took out the little card Anna had made me last Easter. It had a crooked bunny and said, "You make the best pie," in glitter pen. That was all I needed to remember. By evening, the house felt warm again, or maybe it was just me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't wonder if the phone would ring. I didn't wait for permission to matter. The call came just after dinner. Not from my daughter, I hadn't expected that, but from my grandson. Matthew, again. He never called. Texted maybe if he needed money for something, but actual calls were rare. I let it ring once before picking up. "Grandma?" His voice was low, cautious, like he wasn't sure I'd answer. "Yes, Matthew." A pause. Hey. So, I don't know if Mom told you, but I've got this senior trip coming up, like a college tour thing. It's in October, but we have to pay for it now. There it was. I waited. It's just, Mom said she might not be able to swing it this month, with the car stuff and all. And I remembered you helped with the trip last year, so I figured. He trailed off. I wanted to ask him if he'd heard what his mother said at church, if he thought it was okay, if he'd stood up for me after I left. But I didn't. He wouldn't know what to say. How much is it? I asked instead. He sounded surprised. Like $780 for everything. That wasn't nothing, but it wasn't impossible either. I looked out the window. The sun was setting in streaks of gold and purple. The hydrangeas had begun to droop. I'll think about it, I said finally. Oh, okay. Cool. Thanks. He hung up before I could ask him anything more. I sat there for a while, staring at the darkening garden. Then I opened the drawer again, the one with the folder where I'd started writing things down. Receipts, plans, notes. I added a small post-it. Matthew, 780. Senior trip. Called. No thank you, no questions. I didn't write it to punish him. I wrote it so I wouldn't forget. I'd spent too many years forgetting things I should have remembered. The next morning, I went to the post office. I had a letter to send. Not to my daughter, not to Matthew. It was for Anna. I'd written it the night before, after the phone call. Folded it carefully. Just a few pages. Handwritten. I told her about the house. About the trust. About why I'd chosen her. Not because she was perfect, but because she'd always looked at me like I was still someone, even when the others didn't. I didn't say anything about her mother. Children shouldn't be asked to choose sides. But I did say this. You may hear things one day. Stories about what I gave or what I withheld. Just remember, I chose you freely. No one made me. And I would again. I sealed the envelope, dropped it into the box with a quiet thud. The same afternoon, I got a knock on the door. I assumed it was a delivery. I wasn't expecting anyone. But when I opened it, I saw her. Anna. Alone. She looked nervous, holding her backpack with both hands like it might fly away. Hi, Grandma, she said softly. I stepped aside. Come in, sweetheart. She sat at the table like she always had. Same spot, near the window. Her legs had grown longer, her voice deeper. But she still curled her fingers around the mug like a little girl when I gave her cocoa. I got your letter, she said, eyes shining. I nodded. I didn't tell Mom. I figured. I wanted you to know I don't think what she said at church was okay. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice steady. Thank you. She says you've changed, Anna added quietly. That you're acting cold. But you don't seem cold. You seem tired. That made me smile. Not because it was funny, but because it was true. I was tired. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a sheet of paper. A school form. College essay prompts, she said. I wanted to ask if I could write about you. I blinked. Me? Yeah. About everything you've done. For the family. For me. And how, I don't know, how people don't always see it. I couldn't speak. Just nodded. She smiled then. Not the forced kind. The kind that said she remembered. We sat in silence for a long time. Cocoa cooling in our cups. The old clock ticking like a heartbeat behind us. Before she left, she hugged me. Hard. And just like that, I knew I'd made the right choice. Not because she said thank you, but because she came back. I saw Father Joshua again that Friday. It wasn't planned. I hadn't intended to go anywhere, but I'd baked too much, a habit I hadn't quite broken, and the thought of all those molasses cookies going stale on my counter made me restless. So I packed a small tin and walked to the church, figuring the office girls might appreciate them. When I stepped inside, the hallway smelled like lemon cleaner and candle wax, like it always had. Familiar. Quiet. I hadn't been back since the service. I didn't see him at first. Just left the cookies with the secretary. A sweet girl named Noreen who always wore cardigans too big for her. She thanked me, then tilted her head. "He's here, you know. If you wanted to say hi?" I didn't pretend not to know who she meant. So I waited by the side door until he came out of the sanctuary. He was holding a stack of hymnals and looked surprised to see me. "Margaret," he said warmly, as if I hadn't heard my daughter declare I wasn't family less than a week ago in his presence. "I didn't come to cause trouble," I said before he could speak. "I brought cookies." He smiled, setting the books down. "I always said you made the best cookies in town. I stand by it." We sat in the side pews, where the sun spilled through the stained glass. The same shepherd and lambs looked down on us. I used to think they were beautiful. Now they just seemed tired. He waited for me to speak. I didn't want to, not really. But my hands had started to tremble. From holding things in too long, I suppose. "She said it like it was scripture," I finally said. "Like it was truth." He nodded slowly. "I know. I raised her better than that." "You did." I looked at him then, suddenly angry. "Then why didn't you say anything?" His expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. "Because I wasn't the one she hurt. You were. And I figured the last thing you needed was a priest defending you like a child." That stopped me. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I've known your daughter a long time. I married her and blessed her children. I've also seen her slowly distance herself from the roots that made her." I didn't ask what he meant. I knew. "She's built something shiny," he continued, "and shiny things don't always leave room for the worn and true. But you're not forgotten." "She's erased me from everything that matters," I said, quieter now. "School forms, invitations, even her stories. She talks about growing up like I was barely there." Father Joshua didn't argue. Instead, he said, "Anna doesn't erase you." I looked at him sharply. "She sees. She remembers." He smiled again, softer this time. "You know," he added, "we're starting a mentorship program next month. For the teens at St. Luke's shelter. Most of them don't have grandparents. Some never had a home-cooked meal. We need someone steady. Someone who listens more than she talks?" My chest tightened. "You want me?" "I want someone who doesn't need attention, but deserves it. That's you." I didn't answer right away. The silence between us was deep, respectful. Then I said, "What would I even say to those kids?" "You'd say what you always say, just by being there." I walked home slowly, the tin lighter than when I'd arrived. I didn't have an answer yet. But for the first time in a long time, someone had asked me to give something that wasn't money, just presence. And that I still had. The first time she pulled away from me wasn't over an argument. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even personal. It was a dinner party. 10 years ago, maybe more. She had just started dating the man who would become her second husband. A polished man, very proud of his wine knowledge and career in real estate. She hosted a small gathering, invited some colleagues, and included me, as if out of obligation more than joy. I remember the night clearly because I'd brought deviled eggs. That's all I brought. Not wine, not a fancy dessert. Just a plate of deviled eggs like I always made for church picnics and birthdays. My daughter smiled too tightly when I walked in with them. She took the tray, nodded toward the kitchen, and didn't introduce me to anyone. Later that night, I overheard her explaining to one of the women, someone important apparently, that I just did bookkeeping for small businesses. Nothing formal. She laughed as she said it, brushed it off. I wasn't even in the room when she said it, but it settled in my chest like a weight I've carried ever since. She wasn't lying. I really did run a small books and payroll service from home for years. I wasn't licensed like a CPA, but I kept more than a dozen local families afloat during tax season and budget trouble. I taught myself everything. I made it work while raising her, cooking meals, managing our home while Harold worked long hours at the mill. But that night, it was something to be embarrassed of. I left early, said I was tired. She didn't argue. Things were different after that. She stopped inviting me to work events. When Anna was born, I was around, needed even, but not welcomed. I changed diapers and warmed bottles and took midnight walks in the cold so she could sleep. I helped paint the nursery. I fixed the leaking kitchen faucet. But when people came over, I was Margaret, not Mom. Once I overheard her telling someone I was a family friend who helps out. That stung. Harold was still alive then, though already sick. I didn't tell him. He wouldn't have known how to comfort me anyway. He loved her blindly, as fathers often do with daughters. He thought she hung the moon. When he died, something in her hardened. She became brisk with grief, brisk with me, brisk with Anna. I remember the day we buried him. She stood in a black coat that cost more than our first year's rent had been. I looked at her and couldn't find the child I'd once dressed in pigtails and muddy shoes. She stood like a statue. Anna clung to me, confused and crying, and I held her through the whole service. Afterward, my daughter thanked everyone but me. Just a brief glance. Thanks for everything, Mom, as if I'd dropped off a casserole instead of burying the man I'd loved for 40 years. Grief didn't break her. It reshaped her. She became more ambitious, more polished, more removed. Her friends became people with second homes and stylists. She changed her hair, her voice, her politics, her furniture. She changed everything. Except me. I stayed the same. That's what she hated most, I think. That I stayed in the same house, used the same dishes, wore the same perfume. I didn't keep up. I didn't evolve into the kind of mother you showcase on brunch menus and charity boards. I didn't become a new version of myself to match her curated life. And so, I became invisible. Until she needed something. Then the calls came. Could I watch Anna during a work trip? Could I loan money for a down payment? Could I co-sign? Could I co-pay? I said yes every time. Maybe because I thought love looked like giving. Maybe because I didn't know how to say no to my only child. But I do now. And every time I remember that dinner party, the deviled eggs, the quiet shame, the way she laughed to strangers like I was a footnote. I remember why I wrote Anna's name and not hers. Some wounds don't scream. They hum quietly. For years. Until the silence becomes too loud to ignore. It felt strange to hold the deed to the house again. I'd kept it in the same fireproof tin box for decades, along with birth certificates, Harold's discharge papers, the letters we'd written each other when he was overseas, and the tiny, dried-up rose Anna gave me when she was 5. Everything important was in that box. Everything that didn't change, even when people did. Now the deed had a different future. Mr. Halpern had given me a clean folder with new documents inside, The language was clear, formal, firm. The house no longer belonged to Margaret Ellis, sole owner. It belonged to a trust, one that had Anna's name on it and no one else's. It meant that when I died, there would be no arguments, no confusion, no daughter standing at my door pretending to grieve while quietly calculating square footage. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was prepared. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and reread the whole thing 3 times. Then I put it back in the tin and slid the box under my bed, the way I always had. No dramatics. Just decisions. The next morning, I called Richard, my banker. "Margaret," he said cheerfully. "Still enjoying that 4.2% we locked in before the market nosedived?" "Yes, thank you," I smiled. "But I need to make some changes." We went through the accounts. The little ones I'd opened for the grandchildren, the ones in joint names, the ones with old automatic transfers that had long outlived their purpose. "Close these," I said, slowly and clearly. "And this joint one, I'd like it removed from her access." "Your daughters?" he asked carefully. "Yes?" There was a pause on the line. Not judgment, just caution. Richard had been my banker for years. He knew me better than my doctor did. "Understood," he said. "I'll send the papers for signature." "Thank you." After I hung up, I walked out to the porch. It was a Thursday, warm for September. The air had that dry, golden quality it always got when summer began to loosen its grip. I watched a squirrel pick through my planter box, bold as anything, and felt something I hadn't in a while. Relief. Not triumph. Not glee. Just the deep exhale that comes when you've finally finished stitching the tear that's been open too long. I thought of calling Anna. Thought of telling her, gently, what I'd done. Not to alarm her, but to anchor her. But I decided not to. Not yet. She didn't need to carry this weight before it was time. And her mother, well, she'd find out eventually. I didn't do it to punish her. I didn't need to. Life has a way of punishing those who pretend others are disposable. That's not my job. But I'd made sure she wouldn't mistake my silence for weakness ever again. This house was more than brick and paint. It was my sweat, my small sacrifices, my marriage, my late nights feeding a baby, my days packing lunches, folding towels, arguing with banks, making ends meet. It was where Harold held my hand when he got the news, where Anna took her first steps, where I learned to be a woman and not just a role. I wasn't giving it to someone who forgot all that. Not now. Not ever. Inside, the phone rang. I let it ring, and then I smiled. Because for the first time in decades, I owed no one an explanation. She showed up without calling, not Anna, not Matthew, my daughter. It was late afternoon, and I was in the garden pulling weeds, the dry kind that crackle when you tear them out. I heard the tires before I saw the car, that smooth hum of her SUV, too expensive for this street. She didn't park out front like usual. She pulled right into the driveway like she still had a key. I stood up slowly, brushed the dirt from my gloves, and waited. She opened the door with more force than necessary and stepped out in heels far too elegant for this yard. Her blouse was silk, her earrings small and sharp. Her mouth was already tight. "Hi, Mom," I nodded. "Didn't expect you." "I figured." She glanced toward the porch, then back at me, her arms crossed, defensive. "We need to talk." There it was. Not, "How are you?" Not, "Is this a good time?" Just the declaration, like I was a subordinate being summoned. I didn't move. "We're talking." She looked annoyed, as if I hadn't followed the script. "Can we go inside?" No, I said evenly. It's nice out. Her lips parted in surprise. Not used to being told no. She adjusted her purse strap and cleared her throat. I heard you made changes. To what? To your estate? Your accounts? The house? I said nothing. She tried to laugh, but it came out thin. You didn't think maybe we should talk about that first? We just did, I said quietly. Her eyes narrowed. This isn't funny. I'm not laughing. She stepped closer. Mom, this is serious. This house? This is family property. No, I corrected her. This house is mine. She didn't answer right away. I watched her jaw flex. So you're cutting me out, she said finally. Is that what this is? No, I replied. I'm stepping out. There's a difference. She opened her mouth to argue, but I raised a hand. For years, I've given everything, my time, my money, my care. I never asked for anything back but respect. I paused. And I didn't get it. Her face hardened. Is this about church? It's about everything before it and everything after. She shook her head. You're being dramatic. No, I said again. I'm being final. For a moment, her posture wavered, like she wasn't sure what role to play next. Then she tried one more. What about Anna? She asked. You think dragging her into this is fair? Putting her name on everything, making her carry it? I stepped forward. Don't you dare use her to shame me. I gave you 30 years of forgiveness. You gave me distance and judgment. She gave me kindness. That's what I honored. She looked like she might cry. Not from pain, but from pride. I can't believe you'd do this. I can't believe it took me this long. The silence between us buzzed. Bees moved around the rose bushes. A car passed. Somewhere, a sprinkler hissed. Finally, she turned. Well, she said stiffly, I hope you enjoy your independence. I already do. She left without slamming the door, which almost surprised me. Almost. When I went back to the garden, the weeds were still there. But they came up easier now. Anna came again the following Sunday. No backpack this time, no school forms or cocoa. Just her, in a soft blue dress and flats that clicked lightly on the porch steps. She looked older all of a sudden, and I wasn't sure if it was her age or what we'd both lived through these past few weeks. I opened the door before she knocked. She smiled, tentative but warm. I thought maybe you'd want company. I stepped aside. Always. We sat at the kitchen table again, but this time I didn't reach for the kettle. She didn't ask for tea. We just looked at each other for a while, like two women trying to read an entire story from the other's face. She spoke first. Mom's upset. I nodded. She says you're punishing her, that you're turning me against her. My hands were folded on the table. I didn't move them. Are you? Anna asked quietly. No, I said. I'm turning back toward myself. She looked at me hard, searching for something. Why now? That question. Why not years ago? Why not when the first cuts were made? Why not after the first cold shoulder or the first unreturned favor? I could have tried to explain the slow erosion of love. I could have told her about the dinner party, the deviled eggs, the nights I cried without reason. I could have told her how it feels to be useful, but not loved, needed, but not welcomed. Instead, I said, because I want to be able to look you in the eye and know I finally chose dignity. Anna sat back in her chair. She didn't argue, didn't defend her mother, just nodded once, as if to say, I understand. I want to help, she said after a long pause. Help? With anything. With the house. With the mentorship thing you told me about. With just being around more. I reached out, touched her hand. You don't owe me that. I know, she said. That's why I want to. That sentence sat in the room like sunlight, soft, unforced, real. I told her about the trust again, about what would happen and what it meant. I kept it simple, no theatrics, no bitterness. She listened, fully. Can Mom undo it? She asked. No. And she's mad about that? Yes. Anna looked down at the table, then back up. Then I'm proud of you. It was such a quiet thing to say, but it filled the room. We didn't talk about her mother again that day. We didn't need to. Before she left, I handed her a small notebook, one of those old spiral-bound kinds with a faded floral cover. Inside were recipes, grocery lists, bits of poetry I'd copied over the years, and in the back, things I'd written about her when she was small. Nothing poetic, just moments. Anna touched the wind chimes today and asked if they were singing, or she told me she wants to live in a house where the sky never ends. I watched her flip through it. I don't know who I'll be, she whispered. In 10 years, I mean. I smiled. Neither do I. She tucked the notebook into her bag. But I know who I want to become, she added. Then you're already ahead of most. She hugged me tighter than ever before. And when she left, I sat with the quiet for a while. Not lonely, not waiting, just full. I returned to church the next week. Not because I wanted to prove anything, not to stir gossip or make a point. I went because it was Sunday, and that's what I'd always done. The same way you open curtains in the morning or boil water for tea. It was a part of me. I wore a simple cream blouse, the one with the lace collar I'd worn to Harold's retirement luncheon. I pinned on my smallest brooch. Didn't dress up, didn't dress down. Just came as I was. When I stepped through the doors, the same old smell met me. Old wood, beeswax, the faintest trace of lilies from a funeral days past. Familiar, worn, sacred in a way that had nothing to do with grandeur. People noticed me. Some looked away. Others offered the kind of smile you give a woman who's just walked through fire barefoot. But Father Joshua smiled like always. He stood near the altar after the organist finished the prelude. When he began the service, his voice was clear, grounded, warm, like river stones smoothed by years. Then, just before the final hymn, he stepped forward again. We've started something new, he said. A small program for young people without elders in their lives. Mentorship. Listening. Sharing stories. A few heads turned. We asked someone to lead this, he continued. Someone who knows what it means to stand tall without being loud. Someone who's weathered storms with grace. And then, without flourish, he looked right at me. Margaret Ellis has agreed to begin this journey. My chest tightened. Not from nerves. From something else. Something I hadn't felt in years. Respect. Real, honest respect. No applause, no fanfare. Just a quiet murmur of acknowledgement through the pews. And I felt something click back into place. Not like it used to be. Not the woman I once was. But a new stillness. A new steadiness. After the service, people came up to me. Not many, and not dramatically. But enough. A few hands touched mine. A few eyes softened. Some remembered who I had been here long before my daughter's scorn made me feel like a trespasser. You'll be good for those kids, one man said. You listen better than most. That afternoon, I met with the first 2 teens from the shelter. A girl named Simone and a boy called Trev. She barely spoke. He spoke too fast. But I didn't try to fix either of them. I just asked questions. And listened. They stayed longer than expected. ate every cookie I brought. Trev asked if I'd ever ridden a motorcycle. Simone asked what grief felt like when it didn't end. I told her it became softer, like old denim. It didn't stop rubbing against you, but eventually it stopped hurting. She nodded, just once. When they left, I found a napkin on the table with a small, childlike drawing on it, a stick figure next to a house, a dog, a sun, and above it, one word in all caps: safe. I pinned it to the fridge. That night, I sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The street was quiet. Somewhere, a dog barked. Farther off, a train hummed. I thought about all the things I had given that never came back, and then I thought about all the things I still had left to give, and how finally they were going to the right hands. The letter arrived folded in thirds, in an envelope without a return address. I recognized her handwriting immediately. My daughter's. That rigid, slanted style she'd perfected in college. The kind that looks practiced, as if it's meant for professional eyes, not for mothers. I opened it slowly, not out of fear, but because I already knew the contents. You can smell blame before you read it. It was 3 pages long. The first was calm, or pretended to be. I'm writing to express my confusion about the choices you've made recently. Then came the soft accusations. It feels like a betrayal. I'm your only daughter. We've always taken care of each other. Always. That word. It's funny how people remember history only when they're the ones doing the rewriting. By the second page, the tone shifted. You've put Anna in a terrible position. I don't know what stories you've told her. This entire situation has been deeply unfair to me. To her. Not a word about church. Not a mention of the sentence she threw like a dagger in front of a congregation. Not one syllable of apology. The third page was the most revealing. Beneath the careful phrasing, I could see the fear bleeding through the ink. She'd lost control. And I had stepped out of the place she'd built for me. Quiet. Generous. Invisible. I folded the letter back up and placed it in the drawer with the others. Birthday cards signed without warmth. Thank you notes written late. Short apologies attached to longer requests. I kept them all, not out of sentiment, but out of memory. I didn't want to forget the pattern. That afternoon, I didn't write her back. Instead, I wrote a short letter to Anna. Your mother sent me a letter. She's upset. I'm not angry at her. I'm not even disappointed. But I won't explain myself again. I've already lived the truth. And sometimes, that's all a woman can offer. I didn't send that one either. I wasn't sure if I would. Some things are better left unsaid, but not unread. Later, I stood at the sink, rinsing dishes when the phone rang. It was a local number I didn't recognize. I answered. Margaret? A small voice asked. Yes. It's Simone, from church. I smiled. Hello, sweetheart. I wanted to say thanks. For the story you told about the pie. I'd forgotten I told it. About the time Harold ruined the crust trying to help, and I made him eat the whole thing so no one else would know. Simone giggled when I told it, said it sounded like love. Now, she said, it made me think maybe not all endings are bad, maybe some are just quieter. I felt tears prick my eyes but kept my voice even. Some are, I said. The quieter ones last longer. We talked a little more. Not long, but enough. After she hung up, I looked out the kitchen window. The rose bush I'd nearly pulled in April had bloomed again. Soft red, persistent. I didn't need an apology from my daughter. Not anymore. I'd stopped needing what she couldn't give. and I'd started choosing what I would no longer carry. The papers arrived by courier. Formal, thick envelopes. My full name typed across the labels in bold print. Inside, confirmations, signatures, witness statements, notarized seals. It was done. The trust had been finalized. The house, the savings, even the modest life insurance. All of it secured, designated, protected, irrevocable. I sat at the table, reading the documents slowly, line by line. Not because I didn't understand them, I did, but because they deserved to be read with the weight they carried. I'd signed plenty of things in my life: school forms, medical releases, tax returns, checks for ballet shoes, overdue electric bills, and once, for a second-hand car, Anna never knew I bought with my last emergency bond. But this was the first time I'd ever signed something entirely for myself. And for someone who loved me back. No strings, no guilt, just clarity. I slid the final page into the fireproof tin box. The same one that held our marriage license, Harold's dog tags, the deed to a life we built without help and defended without bitterness. When I closed the lid, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm. Outside, the leaves had begun to shift, not fully turned, but edging toward color. You can always tell when autumn is coming. The wind changes its mind. The light gets more honest. I made tea, sat by the window, and for the first time in years, I made a list, not of things to buy or fix or give, but of things I wanted for myself. It was short. Quiet mornings, books I haven't read twice, a warm place to sit, time with Anna laughter that isn't followed by guilt, the sound of someone calling my name with care. I underlined the last one. That evening, I walked to the corner mailbox to send a letter to Richard, just confirming the account updates. The air was crisp, and my knees ached slightly from the change in weather. But I walked slow, steady. People waved from porches. A few dogs barked. No one asked if I needed help. And I didn't. Back home, I lit a candle by Harold's picture. It wasn't a ritual, just something I did now and then when I wanted to feel close to him. His eyes in the photo were soft, lined with kindness and tired joy. He would have understood all this. Not the paperwork, maybe, but the peace. He used to say, "You don't have to be loud to be unmovable." I think that was his way of telling me he saw how much I held together without asking for applause. Before bed, I wrote a new note in the small notebook Anna had started keeping here. Today, I protected what needed protecting, and I didn't explain myself once. It felt like growing older was finally serving its purpose. I closed the book and left it on the shelf. No one needed to read it right away, but someone would, one day. And when they did, they'd know this. I didn't fade. I stayed. And then I chose where the light would fall. 2 days later, I opened the door and found Matthew standing there. No phone in hand this time, no request curled behind his teeth. Just him, shoulders hunched, face uncertain. Taller than I remembered, or maybe just more grown. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. He didn't sit right away. Just stood near the entryway, hands in his pockets, looking at the walls like he'd forgotten they'd once been covered in his childhood drawings. I used to tape them up with masking tape right next to the thermostat. Crayon suns, uneven houses, stick figure people with square fingers. He looked older now, in his clothes, in his quiet. "Mom's not speaking to anyone," he said. I nodded. "She's telling people you've turned on us." I didn't flinch. "Did you come to ask if it's true?" "No," he said quickly. I came because I think I already knew it wasn't. He sat down finally, across from me at the kitchen table. I poured him tea, out of habit more than anything. He took it without a word. She says you poisoned Anna, that you made her think she's special. She is special, I said. He looked at his mug, then back at me. I think she's scared, he admitted, that if you give Anna everything, she'll never come back to Mom. I didn't speak. I'm not asking about money, he added. I don't care about that. I wanted to know why you did it. Why now? I studied him. This boy, this almost man, who used to fall asleep on my lap during thunderstorms. I did it, I said, because I realized love doesn't mean disappearing for someone. He blinked. For years, I gave your mother everything I had, quietly, without asking for thanks. That was my mistake. Not giving, but forgetting to keep even a little for myself. I sipped my tea, let the silence breathe. Your sister saw me, I continued. She didn't need anything from me to offer kindness, so I gave her something lasting, something she didn't have to ask for. He nodded slowly, eyes damp. I guess I'm just sorry. For what? For not saying anything, at church, after Mom said that. I shook my head. You're a child. It wasn't your burden to carry. I'm not a child anymore. No, I said softly. You're not. He looked down again. I don't want us to be like them, he said. Cold. Closed off. Pretending to be better just to avoid being honest. Then don't be, I said. You have a choice. Always. Before he left, he asked if he could come again. Not to talk, he added. Just to sit. Maybe read. You don't need permission, I said. But the truth is, he did. And I gave it. After he left, I felt something ease in my chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But a loosening. A softening. I thought about how he'd said, she's scared. It's strange, isn't it? How control and fear walk so close together. My daughter had spent years trying to shape the world to fit her version of safety, money, distance, status. But control is brittle. It cracks the moment someone stops playing along. And I had finally stopped. Not to punish her, but to protect myself. That evening, I took the old pie plate from the top shelf, the one Harold had broken and glued back together so many years ago. I washed it gently, set it out to dry. Tomorrow, I'd bake. Not for a holiday, not for apology, just because someone was coming to sit quietly in the kitchen again. And this time, I would be seen not as the helper, not as the shadow, but as the home. I baked the pie at sunrise. Not because I couldn't sleep, I'd slept just fine, but because I wanted the house to smell like something warm before the day began. It was an apple pie, not fancy. The kind I used to make when Anna was little, when Harold was alive, when fall meant something besides deadlines and silence. The crust came out golden, a little uneven. I didn't mind. I set it on the windowsill to cool, the way I always had. The air was crisp, and the steam from the filling curled like breath into the morning. Matthew arrived around 10, a book under his arm, and Anna not long after. She brought flowers. Not from a florist, from her own yard. Clipped short, still a little wild. That meant more. They sat in the kitchen, talking low, heads tilted toward each other like two people learning a new language. I didn't hover. I didn't ask what they were saying. I just listened to the rhythm of their voices. I sliced the pie, poured milk. No one asked for anything else. After a while, Anna reached into her bag and handed me a folded sheet of paper. My college essay, she said. I got in. I opened it slowly. The essay, not the letter. It started like this. My grandmother once told me that silence can be a form of courage. The kind that doesn't ask to be seen, but dares to stay anyway. I read each word carefully, as if they were stitched. She'd written about growing up in rooms where history lingered in teacups and old photographs, about how I always left the porch light on, even when no one said they were coming. She'd written about dignity, about the kind of love that doesn't announce itself, but makes sure your coat is zipped and your heart is full. When I finished, I set the paper down. "You wrote that," I said. She nodded. I'd forgotten I ever said that line. "You lived it," she replied. "I just wrote it down." Matthew looked up from his book. "You said something to me once, too," he added. "You told me being kind doesn't mean being soft." I smiled. "I said that after you punched a boy in the 3rd grade." He laughed. I looked at them both. Two people who had seen me, not just what I'd given, not just what I'd withheld, but me. They stayed the whole afternoon. No one rushed. No one reached for a phone. When they left, they hugged me without hesitation. No guilt behind their gestures. No obligation. Just warmth. After they were gone, I sat in the quiet and let the stillness settle. Outside, the trees were fully turned now. Deep reds. Burnt oranges. The kind of color you can't manufacture. The kind that comes only after change. I thought about my daughter. I didn't wish her pain. I didn't wish her apology. I only wished her enough honesty to face the parts of herself she had long abandoned. Whether or not she ever turned back, I no longer hinged my peace on it. I had mine. Before I turned in for the night, I took out the small card Anna had once given me. The one with glitter and a crooked bunny. I'd kept it all these years, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. On the back I wrote, "I chose myself, finally, and the world didn't end. It just got quieter, braver, truer." Then I tucked it between the pages of her essay. One day, she'd find it, and she'd know this. I wasn't erased. I was remembered, and that, in the end, is all any of us ask. To be seen clearly. To be loved without shrinking. To be home, even in our silence.